Mr. T-Man said, don't read EVS or Rippaverse books. They call that drama as pure entertainment. There is a huge element of drama around it, obviously, right? And it's done for entertainment purposes, obviously, right? You'll just know, I just love Ethan Van Sciver's work. I always loved it before he even took to YouTube, before Comicsgate was even a thing. I loved his art, and then I loved his writing once I started to read his books. And as a result, I'll just never say I'm just a fan of him. I look up to a lot of the things he's done, and I just don't. Doesn't mean I agree with everything he says. You know, some of the things I'll even find out after the fact that I've said or spoken out against, he actually said or whatever. But that's not me attacking him or anything. I think he's a great guy. But that's another example. There are people who absolutely have Ethan Van Sciver derangement syndrome. You know, people talk about Trump derangement syndrome or Elon Musk derangement syndrome. And I'm not saying that anybody who doesn't like, I'm not saying like for you, example, Mr. Man, you know, there are people who might just not like, you know, Ethan for whatever. Maybe they had some dealings with him that they didn't think are great, or they did, you know, whatever. You know, I'm not saying everybody who might not be a fan of his has Ethan Van Sciver derangement syndrome, but EVS derangement syndrome is very real. I mean, there are people who find out that I'll never say a word against him and just go on an attack spree against me because but how could, but he said this when the thing was like, you don't have to agree with every single thing that somebody says or does to be a fan of theirs, you know, but that's a mindset. Again, that's the false binary mindset, right? We get into that. Well, I can't be a fan of this person because once they did this story or they said that thing or whatever, it's like, so, you know, yeah, no. So now young Ripa, I've never had any remote dealings with him. I just read some of his work and really didn't like it. I don't think it's a well put together universe. Even the good writers, great, amazing writers who are brought into his universe, like Chuck Dixon and these other people, I think don't do good work in that universe, not because they can't write, but because it's a universe completely devoid of any aspirational heroism, archetypically speaking. I mean, and hey, that appeals to some people. Great. I mean, he's clearly not hurting for sales, so good for him. But it's not for me. So that's the reason why you'll hear me talk more favorably about EVS and maybe not about young Ripa. It's not because you know, I'm in the trenches and doing the anti this person video. It's just, I've always liked him. I remember when well before Comicsgate was even a thing, when EVS was starting his YouTube channel, and it was, I think like 2016 or something, or the lead up to the first Trump election, and it came out that Ethan Van Sciver was a supporter of Donald Trump. And if you know your history, that's when the whole comic book industry just decided that they were going to crucify him for that or whatever. And you know, that was an ugly, ugly time of history in the popular culture industry, comic books or movies or whatever. If you dared support Orange Man bad, you know, then you were, you know, kicked out of the community and everything. And there were people just completely, their careers ended all because they voted for a political candidate or publicly supported a political candidate. It was insane. And I remember going to this little comic shop on a Saturday, I think, because I had some subs. I was still, you know, it was the days of like Rebirth and stuff like that was on the table. So it was still worth looking at modern comics, in my opinion, anyway. And I went to a Saturday, this little locally owned comic shop. And I went there on a Saturday hoping they'd be open. And the owner was there. I was like, oh, sweet, you're open. I was hoping to get my, you know, my pull list or whatever. He's like, oh, I came in today because I found out about Ethan Van Sciver, how he's a Nazi. So I was like, I got to come in and take on all these art posters I have of him. And I said, he's not a Nazi. Where do you get that from? He's not a Nazi. He just supports Trump, and some people don't like that. And this guy just could not see the difference. Well, if he supports Trump, though, I've got to take down the posters I have of him. I'm like, you're insane. I stopped going to that comic book shop because I was like, you know, not too long after that, I stopped reading modern new comics anyway. But yeah, that's part of the topic I talked about earlier. You know, the false binaries, the problem with that, derangement syndromes is a big issue, you know, and there's definitely a really ridiculous. I don't follow so much anymore, so I don't know how many channels out there like anti. But for a while there, during the big split, there were so many channels that just their identity was that they were anti-comic skaters, and they would try to say no, they're for this or that, but no, in practice, all they would do is just talk about their anti-Comicsgate, which means anti-Ethan Van Sciver more often than not when they're saying it. And it's like, you know, you cannot agree with somebody, you cannot appreciate somebody, you cannot want to support somebody, but to make that your identity, that you're anti this, well, that just means that you're really obsessed with that somebody and that you can't get over it, you know?